and for moldings and casting decorative elements. So in English, plaster usually means material used for the interiors of buildings. And then for exterior, they call it render. So you might encounter this in your readings, for example, especially if you are reading a British book. So, or if you're watching a video, sometimes they make reference to render the building in this material. So what they actually say is that they're going to plaster it. So, but then in America and also in the Philippines, we use the word plaster. Another term which is very common also, which you will definitely encounter, is stucco. It's also often used for plaster work that is work in some way to produce relief decoration rather than flat surfaces. Although the stucco in the Philippines is usually just referred to plaster. It's the same plaster. Um, Although some architects would use it because it sounds um, so how do you say it? So shallow. So, but you can also use plaster. So stucco finish or plain cement plaster finish or plaster finish. That's the same. So there are four types of plaster I placed here: clay plaster, gypsum, lime, and cement plaster. Okay. The clay plaster is something which is used from in the old constructions. We also call it by a local term, tabique pampango, or tabique. Um, I'm not sure if Pampango refers to the place, but it's definitely not Pampanga. Um, and I'm not sure whether my sources are correct, but Tabique Pampango refers to a place in Cebu uh, where there is a sitio. I think it's a sitio, Pampango, somewhere in the coast area near City Hall. And that's where this technology probably was started. That's why it's called the Biki Pampango. But then in most churches, in most convents, old convents, if you visit around the old churches and the convents, the walls are made of this type of construction. It's not really most of the time clay, but the way it's constructed, as you can see in the picture here, there is wood inside or sandwiched by clay. Okay, so this technology is not only found in the Philippines; it's also common all around the country. Even in Japan, a lot of their old houses are done this way. So sometimes that's wood inside, sometimes it's bamboo, sometimes it's something else, some indigenous materials. Um, that's Sometimes the wood is maybe shaped so irregular because the more irregular the surface, the more texture, then the more the bonding properties of the clay. So clay is simply your mud, okay? And then as long as it is protected from the rain, so it stays there. So I think in your history, you've encountered some mud houses. No, you talk about especially in the very early times in Catalhuyuk, for example, in Jericho. Those are made of mud. So they stayed because there's very little rain in those countries. But here in the Philippines, where we're visited by 24 typhoons every year, so this is more applicable in the interiors. Okay, so that's why the exterior is mostly wood, but the interior you have this type of finishing. So it's clay, sand, and water with addition of plant fibers. Okay, so plant fibers. So it's any plant that is long or something else. Sometimes they make use of like hay or grass. Um, Hay is not so common in the Philippines. So grass and also, well, in I just watched a video of a restoration project in England and they even use manure, horse or cow manure, no, because it's also bless you. It's also the it has a good bonding quality. So here in the definition, we have this word wood lath. Okay, wood lath refers to these slats, wood slats used as the reinforcement. Last time when we talked about concrete, we said that there's a reinforced concrete, but then we make use of steel. So here it's made of wood. Gypsum plaster is also known as plaster of Paris. Okay, although we make use of the word gypsum when it's in construction, and we make use of the word plaster of Paris when we do some decorative items. Because otherwise, some of our clients, since they don't know this, they think that we're putting up or we're using substandard material, making use of plaster of Paris in our walls, when it should be only for decorative items. So they did not know that they're one and the same. So okay, when the dry plaster powder is mixed with water, it rehydrates over time into gypsum. I'm sure some of you have encountered using plaster of Paris, no, in some projects. Um, so it looks like this. In the picture, it's just white, and then um, you use a screen, no? that the tool that he's using to flatten the surface to make it smooth. Another one is lime plaster, which is also used in a tabique Pampango construction or tabique construction. So with the wood lath, um, lime, like sometimes they call it lime slurry. Um, right now, so in restoring some of the old churches, I have to deal with this material, but it's not easy to to source out. In Cebu, I have a source which sells the lime powder in bags, and then so we mix it with water and then let it stay for a few months, and better if for a few years, no? Because the old construction, especially in how the very traditional houses, bahay na bato, and also the old churches, the stones in Cebu or the Visayas are made of coral stones. And you do not use cement with coral stone. They're not compatible. Okay? If you ever encounter a building made of coral stone which makes use of cement in combination, so it's a bad practice. It's not something that you should follow. Okay, so instead of cement, they make use of lime slurry. So if it's only aged for a few months, like at least 2 months to 6 months, it can be good for mortar. But then if it is even older, from 6 months to a year, or even more, so it's good enough to be used as plaster. Okay, so there's a time element on how it can be used. Now, you must have heard also of the term whitewash. Okay, so this is also the same thing, whitewash, because lime becomes white when it's mixed. No, it's normally white. Um, so sometimes they use this in, say, beautification of streets. So they paint everything white, but instead of using paint, commercial paint, which is more expensive, so they use a mixture of calcium hydroxide and sand or lime, and then they paint it over with a lot of water. So it now has the consistency of paint. So doesn't have to be very thick, but it's white, and it's supposed to make it look clean and beautiful, like white sand for Manila Bay. And then um, okay, so as mentioned here, bottom, it is also used for the blast and plaster, no? Whereby a series of wood strips on a stud-work frame was covered with a semi-dry plaster that hardened into a surface. Now, more common or most common in the Philippines is cement plaster. Cement plaster, you do not use wood for reinforcement. I mentioned last time when we talk about wood that wood tend to deteriorate when in contact with cement because of some chemical composition of cement. Um, Although there are studies of making bamboo as reinforcement for cement, but I have not really followed through that study whether it's possible. But most of the time, it's steel, which we use as reinforcement. In this picture, you see the guy applying the plaster using a hose. So normally the plaster is applied using the tool that we previously showed, the screed. No? Um, I forgot how it's called locally, but if it comes up, I'll tell you. So this other method is used when you have to do uh, some rough plastering, or if the final output of this, which is very rough, is the desired texture, and if you have to cover a big area very fast. So this is uh, a good method. Um, because in applying plaster, there are uh, two stages. First is rough. You apply the plaster over the hollow blocks, and then it's a bit rough. And then second is the finishing plaster, where you apply plaster over your rough plaster, and then make sure that it is smooth. Now, a mason has to be what we call a finishing mason to be able to come up with a very smooth surface. He has to be very good at it. I heard that in some, like Iglesia Ni Cristo or the Seventh-day Adventists, they're very strict on this when uh, they they test, no, they examine your work or the plaster work. So they put off the lights, and then with a flashlight, they look with a flashlight which is placed near the along the wall and showing that part of the wall. No, if there are shadows, so therefore it means that your plaster work is not smooth, because other if it's plain, so if it's straight, so there should be no shadows. And sometimes a way to test it is also to pour water and then to see, because when the water reflects the distortions of the surface. So you might encounter those kinds of clients, but they're more of the problem of the contractor. No? In your case, you just specify. We also have what we call drywall construction, because at that time, the plaster work, which requires the last and plaster method, uh, was starting to get more cumbersome. So they invented the drywall. So also known as plasterboard, wallboard, sheetrock, gypsum board, plasterboard, custard board, or gypsum panel. So these are what the material used for drywall. Drywall simply means that you have the studs or the frame inside, which most of the time is made of wood and sometimes are made of aluminum. And then you sandwich that with all of these materials. Most common is gypsum board. This most common term that we use here in Philippines is gypsum board. And then so gypsum board, you buy it like plywood, except that the dimensions are not the same as plywood, the standard dimension, and also the thickness. Um, so it even has a paper at the back That's why you'll know it's gypsum board. And sometimes when you scratch the surface, it's like you're scratching really plaster of Paris. Okay, so there are many types, and then it's packaged. Um, it has paper liners. The standard board size are 1.2 meters and 5.90 meters wide to coordinate with timber and metal studs. Partitioning system. So the partitioning system is different when it comes to gypsum board, because for plywood, since it's 4 by 8, so your studs supports can be spaced at 2 feet apart. Okay, and then so your plywood would fall under the stud, at least along the studs, and then you can nail them at the edges. But then you cannot do this because this is 0.9. So, and 2 feet is like 0.6. So it has to be like 0.45 millimeter apart. No? So it's not square. Then uh, so you have to be very aware of the spacing when you design, you make the construction drawings. So you can cut this with a saw or scored, or can be snapped. So it's like a brittle. It's a bit brittle. You just score it. You just like um, you just pass through or slice it halfway, and then you snap it. So it's like that. Or you can sew it also out. And the standard thickness is like half inch, and then you have 15 millimeter and 19 millimeter. So there are different types of plasterboard also, depending on what you need. Type H is water resistant, and then type F is more fire resistant. And then there's also the sound insulation boards. The sound insulation boards, sometimes it's applied over another plaster. So to make sure that this, and then to make sure that it is really effective. Although sometimes they also apply it individually. No? The difference is that the surface is not smooth. Okay, because for sound to disperse, the surface has to be rough or textured. And sometimes the pattern is even more defined, like it's coffered, or like your chocolate bars. No? Um, so the fire resistant type is more expensive. That's why we apply it only where it is needed. And then the type H, I think, is the more common. So to install, so you can see in the picture, this is how it would look like once installed. Okay, you see all those white dots. They're actually patching compounds, like that they're supposed to cover the nails, and then so the nails you drive it through, and then you make sure that it is embedded deep into the plasterboard, so that when you apply the patching compound, you can sand it to have a smooth finish and you don't see any nails. And the same with the joints. You put actually like a tape. So here it says in the fourth part, no? The walls are then taped with either paper or fiberglass mesh tape. So they look like the gauge, the gauze, no? For first aid. Um, at the joints, corners, and places where the boards have been fastened to the wall. And then there's a compound, the patching compound, which are added and then sanded to give a smoother finish. So once done, this is now ready for painting. So it is applied in ceiling, in walls, but it is not applied to floors. Okay, um, and then you apply it only in the interior. The advantages, first, is that the process of installation requires less time and labor, so it is faster, which translates to less cost. So in terms of labor cost, because you're paying people by the day. And then drywall also helps to reduce noise along with having fire resistant properties due to the water in the boards. Okay, so there's that uh, noise reducing property. The disadvantages, drywall can be damaged by the settling of the building or homeowner accidents. Um, if you get wild and you punch the um, the wall, so chances are you'll create a hole easily compared to plywood. Plywood is more sturdy and these types of things. No? A common problem is nail or screw pops. Okay, so we try to hide the nails, but because of the movement of the house, for some reason the nail pops out. Okay, so when the head of these fasteners creates a bulge or becomes visible through the drywall. And then if you are the OC type, you will not get sleep because of that. No? And then gypsum drywall is susceptible to water damage if exposed to elevated levels of moisture along very long periods of time. So it can only take water for so much, no, for a short period of time. But otherwise, it starts to seep in water and then everything becomes destroyed. No? There are specialty drywall boards with additives that are designed for better water resistance, but only water resistance, not really waterproofing. Along with water sensitivity, gypsum drywall boards can have mold problems. Okay? To decrease the chance for molds, new gypsum drywall boards are going paperless. So it's the paper quality in the paper component in gypsum board that are sometimes giving it problems. We also have what we call precast plaster. Okay, um, and this is an example. So it's like a molding. Well, it's a decorative material. Instead of putting wooden cornices, you make use of plaster cornices. If it's this complicated in design, this is actually made on the shop, and then you just buy it by piece per length, and then you cut it like you would with wood. Um, but you can also do it on site if the profile, if the design is just uh, simple. No? What they do is that with the plywood, they cut the pattern and then put plaster and then just run that pattern over the plaster, so that creates that profile for the cornice. There are actually videos on it. I meant to upload some videos, but then realized that maybe it's something that you should also do because there's so many videos, and then you can choose which one is more educational for you because the way they present it sometimes it's boring. The one that I wanted to upload was supposed to be very interesting, very detailed, but there's very loud music background. So I was thinking that maybe you won't survive halfway through the video. So it's better for you to be the one to choose the video. So aside from cornices and ceilings, for example, it's not very clear here, but the ceiling you also have something circular, and sometimes there is a light hanging from the center. We call that a medallion. So also decorative trims for the walls, especially if your project calls for a baroque theme, quote unquote theme. But normally that happens only if your client is really rich, or if you are making a very um, very well, an old old type of old theme church or chapel, so Baroque theme, or some government buildings, but not the lower government. I mean the more national maybe in scope. So I think this is the last slide. So let's talk about your homework. Oops. Wait, we don't have a homework. Um, I actually decided not to give you a homework for now, um, because well, just to give you a break. So anyway, no homework. So you only need to submit one homework on the 16th. Um, I say here, assign homework number 3. So there's no more homework number 3. So next meeting we'll have the quiz for the 2 topics, uh, cement and concrete, and also for this one, plaster and board materials. And then you'll submit your homework number 2. On the 18th, we'll deal with another topic. And then on the 21st, we'll have the pre-midterm exam. This time it will be using Canvas. And starting after this, we will be using Canvas. Okay. Um, then the homework will be through Canvas, submissions will be through Canvas, everything will be Canvas. Although I will not yet close down the Google Classroom just in case there are glitches again in Canvas. Okay, but we've already tried the Canvas. Even our meetings right now, which is in Google Meet, might be in Canvas later. One of the classes in this subject, parallel to mine, by architect, what's her name? Behik, Aris Behik. Um, she's now experimenting on the Canvas conference. That's what they call it. So we will know after today how it works and if it works, and so we'll shift to that. But after the midterms, okay, the midterm, I mean the pre-midterm coverage will be everything from the start until ceramic stones and stonework. Okay, so there will be no quiz on ceramic stone and stonework alone. So it will be incorporated in the pre-midterm. Okay, so that's it. Um, there are 47 of you, so there are only 2 absent. Let me check the chat box for some questions. Um, it seems that my announcement of no homework is making everyone very happy. So, sir, we love you. Okay, I love you too. Okay, no questions.
Sir, nakoy question, sir.
Yes, okay, that's
Ay,
better.
kanang dili ni sa kanang murag nara koy kanang clarification kay ni ato ko sa canvas, sir, kay para
Mm,
magtuon ko unta sa cement and kanang tawag ni cement and concrete.
concrete.
Pero ang PDF na na-upload, sir, kay dili about sa cement and concrete, about siya sa wood gihapon, sir. Sa wood
Okay.
materials.
Okay, I'll check on that because the content of Canvas is just like given to us because it works this way. So if there were 4 teachers teaching the same course, one of them is like the coordinator, and in this case it's architect Aris Behe, and she made all the contents. Then she shared it with all of us, and then we're supposed uh, to change what we need, what we wanted to change from that. So I have not really looked into uh, the old files yet, but I'll check on that and make sure that I change it. So don't worry.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So any more questions? Um, I read here from Robert Elias, what's happening? Go ba ako headset. I hope your headset is back on. Where do we pass the homework? For now, it's Google Classroom. So we only pass through Canvas after the pre-midterms. Nagkaon na ka, sir? You're so concerned. Yes, and for you, I will eat again. Ano man, what's this obsession with eating? So, yeah, you can submit through Classroom and Canvas, but I'll check the Classroom. I'll be checking the submissions from the Classroom. But it's okay to submit also in Canvas just to try it out. Um, Sir, if okay, if you'll post the PowerPoint as well, yes, okay, I'll post the PowerPoint. Um, Here, both here and in Canvas. Dungan ang quiz sa cement o ang topic today? Yes, on September 16. So it's a bit, I don't know whether it's a bit long, but yes, dungan. Um, Pila ka items, sir, depends on how lazy I am in making the quiz. It's simply like that. So, but okay, there's a proposal to have a 100 item quiz. Okay, I'll take the challenge. Um, I wanted it to be a time pressured exam, like the moment you start, the clock starts ticking and you have to
Sir, come back, sir. Sir, no. Hala, nawala na, Jude.
Uy, mga klase. End na daw si sir.
Bye.
Hello. So we had power
Hello, sir.
interruption. With the
Welcome
power
back, sir.
interruption. So I came back to say goodbye. We have to end. So, and I have to make sure that this is ended because it's still recording. I noticed that's why I had to go back, okay, to stop the recording. Okay, so hope to see you again. Ah, by the way,